So this second section looks at this second section of language themes is all about using individual words in the English classroom and using them not just to record ideas but also to generate new ideas, to generate thought and to generate conceptual understanding. And the focus will be on denotation, connotation, and etymology. So denotation being the actual dictionary meaning of the word, connotation, like all the ideas that are associated with a word, and etymology, which is all about the history, the background of a word. So beginning with something pretty simple, helping students to understand those fine distinctions in meaning. A very simple way of doing that is providing two words that have very similar definitions. For example, what's the difference between patronising and condescending? How do you get kids to understand that? And how do you get kids to then demonstrate their understanding of that? There's lots of different ways that you can do it. You can get them to explain it with examples, you can get them to act it out, or create character portraits like Dr. Patronising and Mr. Condescending. Perhaps you could get them to create a pair of symbols or icons or little iPhone icons or emoticons or something along those lines. You can get them to look up the etymology, you can get them to explore the usage of the word with Ngram Viewer, or even debate which is worse, whether it's worse to be patronised or condescended. Connotation. The question here is, can one word, just one single word, change the entire narrative or the entire discursive trajectory, the way that a story is going to go, and everything that we expect about a story? Can one word change all of that? Taking a look at this little building here, there's lots of different words that could be used to describe this one building. Now, if we then create a little sentence that students are given that prompts them to explain what happens in this building, but give every single student, or every, say, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 students, a different word to fill in. So in the cubby, or in the studio, or in the workshop, they, and leave it for them to finish the sentence. What you'll find is that the word that they're given to describe that building will determine a slightly different trajectory for their little narrative. Because if it's a studio, for example, they're more likely to describe some kind of artistic endeavour that the person in that building completes. If they say that it's a workshop, they're more likely to describe something far more practical, something along the lines of using particular kinds of building tools. If, on the other hand, it's a shack, it's more likely to be some kind of a dwelling. So all of these words so cubby, man cave, lab, shed, office, studio, workshop, shack, they're all words that could be used to describe this particular building. And each of those, when put into the sentence previously, is going to direct our thoughts down a different path. So clearly then, that one word has actually completely changed the trajectory of that story. So what we end up finding is that the character, when they go into that building, what they do, based on the word used to describe that building, tells us an enormous amount about them. about that character, but it also tells us an enormous amount about the society that they live in. The very fact that, for example, this can be called a man cave says a lot about a society in which this place called a man cave needs to exist. The associations between man and cave, and what would happen in a cave. Why do men need to go to this place called a man cave? Why are there no women caves? And it also sort of determines what kind of story is likely to follow. If it's a studio, for example, it's far more likely that it's going to be a story about a person who has some kind of artistic temperaments. Whereas if, back to the man cave example, it's far more likely that we're going to be looking at some kind of story that involves I guess, stereotypical ideas of what it means to be masculine. And so what that character found, or what that character does, is then determined by the word and its connotations. Okay, looking at etymology. So etymology is like tracing the cultural, social, and political history of the word. It's not just whether or not it's Greek or Latin. It's going back right and digging deep into the archaeology of the word, looking at where it came from and how it's been used and how it's changed throughout history. So a great little example is this idea of Adam's rib from Genesis. So the story goes that God created man, and then he decided that man needed a friend, so he took Adam's rib, and from Adam's rib he created woman. Now the problem with this is that the Hebrew word that has been translated to rib actually means, or one interpretation of it means side. And that gives us a completely different understanding of that story from Genesis. And because side implies that Adam, or man, has actually been, has been broken into two halves, and each side has been formed into either man or woman. And when you join those two back together, that's where the two are said to be complete. But what's more important probably here is that the implications of that particular interpretation have been very far-reaching. So we have to ask the questions: when and why was it translated as rib instead of side? And secondly, how does that change our understanding of the relationship between man and woman? Because the traditional view that a rib was taken suggests that woman is inferior, and a derivative of man. However, if we take the interpretation of taking one side or one half, it presents this idea of man and woman being equal. Secondly, if we take this idea of rib, which also has the connotations of a cage, of something protecting the vital organs, and you take one of those away, it suggests that the female, or in God creating woman, he's actually weakened man. So again, the idea of side is far more positive and promotes a far more equal relationship between man and woman. We get that understanding all by looking at the etymology of the word. Another example, the word think. If we go back to its roots, it's an Old English word. The font here hasn't represented it properly, but it's an Old English word that means something along the lines of imagine, conceive in the mind, consider, meditate, remember, intend, wish, desire, and it was probably originally cause to appear to oneself, which is pretty interesting when you start to use that in a sentence where you would normally use think, because it really helps to clarify or add an extra level of sophistication to an understanding of any sentence that uses the word think. So to give some examples, the first one, from Albert Einstein. The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. So if we substitute the words, the definition cause to appear to oneself for the term thinking, we get the world as we have created it is a process of our appearing to ourselves, or you might sort of think of looking at ourselves. It cannot be changed without changing the way we appear to ourselves. So it has this very different, it creates this shift in understanding of that quote, because it suggests that it's all in the way that we look at ourselves that will have the biggest impact on the way that we engage with our world. The second quote, "Stop thinking and end your problems," by Lao Tzu. Again, not good on the pronunciation there. The idea of stop thinking and end your problems. Stop looking at yourself. Stop being so self-centered. Stop focusing on yourself. And in doing that, you will end your problems. Finally, one of the most famous think quotes, the cogito, "I think, therefore I am." So I appear to myself, therefore I am. I can recognize myself. I can see myself. I can know that I am here, therefore I am.